The sky over Virex 9 was dark red, filled with flying ships and blinking lights. The great city of Tarsoon Prime was always busy, always loud, always shining. But no one looked down. And down there, on the lower streets in the dirty corners, Silari walked alone with a small child in her arms. Her back hurt, her legs were tired. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. Her daughter Luma coughed softly against her shoulder, her tiny arms wrapped around Silari's neck. Her skin was warm with fever. Her breath was weak. Silari's heart broke with every step. She had knocked on 9 doors that day, 9 different factories, 9 different workshops. Each one said the same thing. Single mother? We don't hire problems. We need speed, not pity. Take the child away, then come back. But Silari didn't have anyone to leave Luma with. Her husband had died in a mining accident 2 years ago. Since then, she had lived in a broken shelter, cleaning scrap metal to earn a few credits. Some nights they didn't eat. Some nights she didn't sleep. And now, Luma was sick. If she didn't find work soon, her daughter wouldn't survive. Silari stood in front of one last building. It was small, old. The metal walls were scratched. A faded sign above the door said, "Jack's Fix-It Bay, no promises, but we try." She stared at it. This wasn't a royal lab. It wasn't a fancy bot shop. But it had lights. It had warmth. And right now that was enough. She took a deep breath and knocked. The door opened with a creak, and a strange figure stood there, tall, 2-legged, rough beard, worn-out brown jacket, gloves full of grease. A human. Silari had never seen one up close. She had heard stories, that they were wild, unpredictable, too soft for a galaxy like this. But the man looked at her calmly, then looked at Luma in her arms, and said, "You lost?" Silari shook her head. "No, I'm looking for work." The man scratched his beard. "With a kid?" "Yes," she said quietly. Most would slam the door now, or laugh. But the man didn't. He leaned against the doorframe. "You any good with a wrench?" Silari blinked. "I can learn." The man nodded slowly, then stepped aside. "Well," he said, "no one ever learned anything by standing outside." Inside, the shop smelled like burnt wires and engine oil. Machines sat open on metal tables, some humming, some sparking, some half taken apart. It was messy, noisy, and alive. Luma looked up sleepily. Silari held her tighter. The human walked to a small bench and pointed, "Put her down. That cot's clean. You hungry?" Silari was stunned. "What? You? Food? Yes or no?" She nodded slowly. He handed her a small food pack and turned back to his work. "I'm Jack," he said without looking. "I don't do paperwork. I don't care about rules. I just need someone who won't quit after the first burn." Silari held the warm food and looked at her daughter resting on the cot. She stepped forward, voice soft. "I won't quit." Jack didn't say anything for a while. He handed her a small tool. "Good. That's a stripped coil from a power drill. You figure out how to fix it. You stay." Silari took the tool, heart pounding. It had been years since she touched anything, more complex than scrap. But her hands remembered. Not perfect, not fast, but steady. She worked quietly while Luma slept nearby. Jack watched her from the corner of his eye. She didn't talk. She didn't complain. She just worked. And when she handed the coil back, fixed but scratched, he nodded once. "You're hired." That night, Silari sat in the back room Jack gave her and her daughter. It was small, but it had a door, a real bed, a clean blanket. She tucked Luma in, kissed her forehead, and sat on the floor. Her hands were sore, her arms were tired, but for the first time in years, she felt safe. Outside the door, Jack tightened the bolts on a busted service bot. He didn't look up, but he whispered to himself, "Everyone deserves one chance." The next morning, Silari woke before the lights came on. The back room Jack had given her was still dark and quiet. Luma lay curled in the small cot beside her, breathing slowly. The fever was lower now, but not gone. Solari gently brushed her daughter's cheek and stood up. Her muscles ached. Her hands were stiff from yesterday's work. But she didn't stop to rest. She tied her hair, pulled on her worn gloves, and stepped out into the main repair bay. Jack was already there. He stood over a broken cargo drone, sipping from a metal cup, eyes half open. "You're early," he said. "I'm ready," she answered. Jack raised an eyebrow. "All right then," he muttered. "Let's see what you've got." He showed her the drone's wiring, messy, tangled, and partly burned. "It shorted mid-flight," he said. "We need to rebuild the circuit core and reseal the wings. Not easy, not fun." Solari took a deep breath. "Where do I start?" Jack smiled slightly. "Good question." She worked all day. Her fingers slipped. Sparks burned her skin. She dropped tools. She made mistakes. Twice, she cut her palm on a sharp edge. Blood dripped down her wrist. Jack offered her bandages. She wrapped her hand and went back to work. By evening, the drone buzzed softly and lifted an inch off the ground. Not perfect, but alive. Jack crossed his arms and nodded. "You've got good instincts. Rough hands, though." Solari wiped the sweat from her forehead. "I can't afford soft hands." Later that night, Jack handed her a plate of warm food and a water flask. "No one's ever fixed that drone in one day," he said. Solari looked down, unsure. "I just need to keep this." Jack leaned back in his chair. "You earned another day, that's how it works here." The next few days passed quickly. Jack kept throwing harder tasks at her. Broken servo arms, rusted loaders, half-melted kitchen bots. Solari never said no, even when her hands shook, even when her arms went numb. She kept working, and Luma. She stayed nearby, always watching. She would sit on the floor with a soft blanket, drawing pictures in the dust with her fingers. Sometimes she hummed quietly. Sometimes she just stared at her mother. Jack noticed. One evening, after fixing an old power rig, Solari walked into the back room with aching legs. Luma stood up with a smile and held up something. A small, crooked figure, made from scrap wire and metal screws. "This is you," she said proudly. Solari took it, eyes wet with tired joy. "You made this?" Luma nodded. "You fix things. So I did too." Outside, Jack stood near the door and listened. He didn't say anything, but he smiled. The next morning, a customer walked in, a large reptilian alien with cold eyes and a broken plasma cutter. He glanced at Solari behind the counter and scowled. "You hire her?" he asked Jack. Jack nodded. "She works harder than anyone I've seen." The customer grunted. "She's got a kid. She'll get soft." Jack crossed his arms. "She works. That's all I need to know." The customer muttered and left. Solari stood silently for a moment, then whispered, "Thank you." Jack just shrugged. "You didn't quit. That's the only thing I care about." That evening, Solari sat outside the shop under a dull sky, watching the stars barely glow behind city smog. She held Luma in her lap. The girl was asleep, warm and breathing easy. For the first time in months, she wasn't coughing. And Solari whispered into her daughter's ear, "We're going to be okay. I think we've finally found our place." Inside, Jack turned off the lights and cleaned the workbench. He looked at the small drawing Luma had, made earlier. A stick-figure family. 3 figures, 2 tall, 1 small, all smiling. He picked it up, tapped the edge of the paper with his thumb, and quietly said, "Maybe I did the right thing after all." The shop on the edge of Tarsoon Prime was still small, but something inside it was changing. Not the walls, not the machines, but Solari. She no longer waited for instructions. She no longer flinched when a tool sparked. She moved through the repair bay with purpose, Jack noticed. She had stopped asking, "Are you sure I can do this?" Now she just said, "Show me what's broken." That morning, a family of insectoid miners rolled in a busted gravity lifter. It screeched and smoked. Solari wiped her hands on her apron, pulled her gloves tight, and nodded. "I've got it." Jack stepped back and crossed his arms. He didn't offer help. He didn't need to. She opened the lifter's access panel, wires spilling like tangled vines. Luma sat nearby, swinging her legs, watching closely. "Can I help, Mama?" she asked. Solari smiled. "Hand me the yellow wrench." Luma searched the toolbox, picked the right one, and passed it over. Solari took it and grinned. "You've got the eye," Jack chuckled from behind. "Starting her young, huh?" Solari smirked. "She's already smarter than me." That night the shop was quiet. Jack sat sharpening a broken blade tool. Solari sat beside him, cleaning grease off her arms. She glanced over at him. "Why did you open a shop true on this planet?" Jack shrugged. "Everyone said not to." "That sounds like a terrible reason," she said, teasing. He smiled faintly. "They told me humans wouldn't survive in alien cities. Too fragile. Too soft." He paused. "But softness isn't weakness. And kindness isn't stupidity. I figured someone should prove that." Solari looked down at her hands. "Rough, scarred, but capable. You gave me a chance no one else would." Jack leaned forward, setting the blade aside. "No," he said. "You took the chance. I just didn't slam the door." The next day, a new challenge rolled in, a broken language assist bot from a nearby school. The customer looked doubtful when Solari greeted her. You know programming?" Solari smiled gently. "I know how to read a circuit." She opened the bot's chest plate and began to diagnose the issue. Luma stood beside her, studying a schematic Jack had printed out. "Line 3 is wrong," Luma said suddenly. Solari blinked, then looked closer. She smiled wide. "You're right." The customer watched in surprise. "She's just a child." Jack, sweeping the floor, answered without looking up. "So was I when I fixed my first radio." Later that evening, Solari opened a drawer and found something strange. A small old human book, dusty, with torn edges. The Art of Fixing Broken Things. She opened the cover. Inside was a note. "Sometimes machines are easier than people, but sometimes fixing machines helps fix people too." Jack, she stared at the words for a long time, then closed the book. That night, as Luma slept curled up in a blanket made from old bot canvas, Solari stood outside the shop, staring at the stars above the polluted sky. She whispered, "Maybe I'm not just surviving anymore." Inside, Jack adjusted a broken motor casing. His back ached, his hands were stained black, but he smiled to himself and whispered, "Maybe she's not just passing through." The little shop on the edge of Tarsoon Prime had no big signs, no fancy lights, and no official sponsors. But every day, more customers came. Not because of ads, but because of Solari. Word spread through the city streets. "She fixed my drone in one day. She didn't charge extra when the repair was hard." She smiled and thanked me. Soon, miners came, then factory workers, then even school teachers. And when they walked in, they found a woman with strong hands and a calm voice. They found a child drawing pictures beside the workbench, and they found a human who didn't talk too much but always listened. One morning, Jack unlocked the shop and stopped at the door. Solari was already inside, wearing a new tool belt. She had made it from old engine straps. Jack grinned. "Nice belt," she smiled back. "Figured it was time I stopped borrowing yours." He nodded. "Guess this isn't my shop alone anymore." She tilted her head. It never was. By week's end, they had to move the broken parts outside just to make space for customers. Solari reorganized the shelves. Luma painted little signs and arrows. Jack rewired the light grid. The whole place felt new, alive, balanced. That night, Jack came in holding something behind his back. Solari raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" He pulled it out, a new sign. It read, "Jack and Solari's Honest Repairs," wooden letters. Hand-painted, simple, but real. Solari touched the edge of it, surprised. You put my name up? Jack looked confused. It's your shop too. She blinked, then nodded slowly. Thank you. He shrugged. Credit where it's due. But not everyone in the city liked what they were building. Across the upper levels of Tarsun Prime, a sleek repair lounge called Xenotech Elite had started losing customers. Its owner, Krullenvex, wasn't happy. He wore clean robes, perfect hair, fake smile. One of his managers whispered, "That human and the mother. Customers say they're faster." Krullen's eyes narrowed. Then we make them slower. Back in the little shop, Solari helped a young alien couple fix a nursery bot. It had cracked arms and stuttering speech. Luma giggled as the bot tried to say hello. Solari tightened a bolt and reprogrammed the greeting. "Welcome, little one," the bot said in a warm voice. The couple clapped. They left happy and returned the next day with their friends. That evening, Jack looked around the shop and whistled. "We're gonna need more shelves." Solari wiped her hands. "More shelves, more bolts, more time." Jack handed her a data pad. "Also, more orders." She laughed for the first time that day, and Luma danced across the room waving her toy wrench. But outside the shop, watching from across the street, stood two tall figures in dark uniforms. They didn't speak. They only scanned the shop quietly, then walked into the shadows. Inside, Solari placed the new shop sign on the front wall. She stepped back, arms crossed, staring at it. Then she turned to Jack. "You gave me a job." Jack replied, "No, you turned it into something more." For the first time in years, Solari didn't feel like a worker. She didn't feel like a guest. She felt like an equal, like she belonged. The morning was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't feel calm. It feels like a warning. Solari noticed it first. The usual line outside the shop was gone. No footsteps, no laughter, no knocking at the door. She stepped outside and looked around. Two large armored figures stood at the corner, watching, waiting. They wore the symbol of Xenotech Elite, one of the most powerful companies in Tarsun Prime. Solari felt a chill run through her spine. She went back inside. Jack was working under a broken flight cart. He didn't even look up. "They're here, aren't they?" Solari nodded. "They're not just here to look." Jack rolled out. From under the cart, wiped his hands and sighed. "Then let's not give them a reason to stay." But it didn't stop. Later that day, two city officers arrived. They wore fancy white uniforms and smug expressions. One of them read from a digital tablet. "You're in violation of Code 42.7b, unauthorized signage." Jack raised an eyebrow. "You mean the sign we made by hand?" "Unregistered," the officer replied. "It must come down." Solari stepped forward. "What about the permits we filed last month?" The other officer smirked. "Lost in the system." Jack sighed. "I see." The next day, their parts shipment was blocked. The day after that, their water line was shut off. A notice appeared on their door. "Under review for closure. Unsafe for business." But everyone knew what this really was. A warning. Stop. Leave. Or be erased. That night, Solari sat in the back room, Luma asleep beside her. She stared at her tool belt, at her cracked gloves. Her hands were shaking. "What if we lose it all?" she whispered. Jack stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "Then we rebuild it." She looked at him, eyes tired. "How can you be so calm?" "I'm not calm," Jack said. "I'm just stubborn." The next day was worse. Just before closing, someone threw something through the front window. Boom! A small firebomb. Flames burst against the far wall. Smoke filled the air. Solari grabbed Luma and shielded her with her own body. Jack ran for the fire foam. They worked fast. The flames died. Quickly, but the damage had already been done. Ash, glass, burned wires, and in the center of it all, Jack, coughing and limping, his arm burned badly. At the emergency center, Solari sat beside his bed. He was pale, quiet, but alive. I should have seen it coming, he whispered. You gave me a life, Solari said softly. You gave Luma a future. I won't let them take it. Jack looked at her. I don't care if they burn the walls down, he said. You're the part of this shop they'll never break. She reached out, took his hand, and held it tightly. For the first time, she cried. Not from fear, but from the weight of everything they'd built and the fear of losing it. The next morning, a video surfaced on the local net, security footage of the firebomb. It showed Solari shielding her child, it showed Jack fighting the flames, and it showed the attackers' faces. The city reacted fast. People were angry, furious. They tried to burn down a family shop. She risked her life for her daughter. They stood for kindness and they were attacked for it. Support poured in, donations, messages, flowers, food, even small toys for Luma. A group of alien mothers marched down the street and painted the shop door with a message in 3 languages. This place gave one of us a chance. Now it's time. We stand for her. Later that night, Jack sat on the bench outside the burned shop, arm in a sling. Solari stood beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder. She whispered, You shouldn't have fought the fire alone. He looked up at her. I wasn't alone. 3 days after the fire, the shop doors stayed closed, but the world outside, it was watching. The video of the attack had gone viral across Virex 9. Screens played it in marketplaces. News channels repeated it hourly. Over and over it showed. A mother shielding her daughter with her own body. A human man rushing into fire with bare hands, and behind them, a small hand-painted sign. Jack and Solari's honest repairs. They tried to burn down a workshop. Instead, they lit a movement. In the back room, Jack sat at a small table with his arm in a sling. Solari stood beside him, reading hundreds of messages on a borrowed tablet. She fixed my brother's hover chair for free. My son works now because she believed in him. My mother cried when Luma gave her a handmade flower. Solari's eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying. She was fierce. Jack looked up. They want you to speak. Solari blinked. Me? They want to hear from the one who never spoke before. The next morning, Solari stood before a crowd. Not in a palace, not in a news studio, but on the cracked sidewalk outside her burned shop. Behind her stood Jack, his arm bandaged, his eyes proud. Beside him, Luma, holding a small sign that read, This shop is home. The cameras rolled, voices hushed. The city leaned in. Solari stepped up to the mic. She didn't read from notes. She didn't shout. She just spoke. I didn't come here to make a speech, she said. I came here because I wanted to feed my daughter. I walked these streets begging for work. 9 doors slammed in my face. She paused, heart pounding. But the 10th door opened. A human opened it. She looked down at Jack, then back, to the crowd. He didn't ask me for a resume. He didn't ask about my past. He didn't ask why I had a child in my arms. He just asked, Can you hold a wrench? The crowd laughed gently, but many wiped tears. Solari continued, I'm not weak. I am not a burden. I'm not just a mother. I'm an engineer, a fixer, a builder. She raised her voice now. I carried my child through fire. Not just the one that burned our shop, but the fire of rejection, of silence, of being unseen. And then she said, If kindness is rebellion, then let the world watch me rebel. Applause erupted. People cheered. Mothers raised their fists. Children chanted her name. Solari. Solari. By nightfall, donations flooded in. A local builder offered new tools. A human ambassador sent repair drones. A famous singer shared her story across 5 planets. Even Tarsoon Prime's mayor arrived, promising protection and funding. But Solari asked for just one thing. Let me rebuild my shop with my own hands. The next week, Jack and Solari's was reborn, stronger walls, better lights, a new door with flame-proof shielding, and above it all a sign in glowing script. Home is where second chances are given. That evening, Jack sat on the rooftop with Solari and Luma. The city lights blinked around them, but they were quiet. Was it worth it? Solari asked. Jack didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, at the woman the galaxy now knew, at the woman who found her voice. Then he said, "Let them watch. You've earned it." 5 years later, the neon skies over Tarsoon Prime still blinked and shimmered. The city still buzzed. But one corner of it, once ignored, once burned, now stood as a symbol of something greater. Jack and Solari's honest repairs had become more than a shop. It had become a school, a shelter, a movement. The building now stretched 3 stories high. Inside were clean work bays, coding pods, welding rooms, and laughter. Children ran between tool benches. Mothers tightened bolts. Old engineers taught young ones. And above the entrance, carved into a steel plaque, was the quote that changed everything. "If kindness is rebellion, then let the world watch me rebel." Solari stood inside Workshop Bay 3, showing a group of new trainees how to recalibrate a microcore engine. She moved with quiet confidence. Every motion practiced, every word simple. Every student focused, no longer afraid. Luma, now 12, zipped through the halls with a tablet in one hand and a hoverbot prototype in the other. Her eyes sparkled. "Mama," she called. "It worked." Solari turned, smiled wide. "The stabilizer?" Luma grinned. "Flies straight now, I even named it." "What's it called?" Luma winked. "Second chance." Later that day, Solari stood on the shop's rooftop, the same place she had once stood after the fire. But now the city looked different. It looked possible. Jack walked up slowly, a little older now, hair more gray than brown, but his hands still strong. He held a hot cup of spiced tea. She took it. They didn't need words. But he spoke anyway. "You were never just a worker." Solari looked at him, eyes glowing in the dimming sun. "I never believed I could be more." "Until you believed. First," he chuckled. "You just needed a shop to show the galaxy what you already were." Newsfeeds still talked about Solari sometimes. They called her the Fire Mother, the Wrench Queen, the Builder of Hope. She didn't care for titles. All she wanted was to keep the door open for the next mother, the next person left behind. One day, a small alien boy stood outside the shop, his clothes torn, holding a broken toy and shaking hands. Solari knelt beside him. "Need something fixed?" she asked gently. He nodded slowly. She took the toy, looked it over, and smiled. "We've got time." She led him inside. Luma handed him a juice box, and Jack tapped the boy's shoulder and said, "Welcome to the family." The stars blinked above. The city, the people of Tarsoon Prime still worked, still hurried, still built machines and fortunes. But in one shop, where smoke once rose, now rose hope. Hope shaped by hands. Hands that once shook with fear, now steady with purpose. And when visitors asked about Solari, who she was, what she did, people would smile and say, "She was never just a worker. She's the reason we believe in second chances."